I believe we're at a point in the search industry where search is understood by most people. We've had the technological revolution. We continue to have more technological revolution on the search side. We are looking at what's happening in the display video world, but I think we're still in the very early stages. Now, the reason display hasn't accelerated so fast is because it has been somewhat fragmented, and that's what relates to our announcement earlier this week around our ad exchange, because we believe things like that will drive more consistency and probably more ability for us collectively in the industry to target different tiers and different premium publishers and advertisers in the marketplace. We're still in the early parts of those cycles in the social media space and the mobile space. We're sort of going through the technology user content explosion, then we're trying to figure our way out in the advertising space. Similarly in mobile, we're still in the early phases of getting a lot more users. So the point I'm trying to make is that all these technologically driven user and content cycles will find a home with advertising. It just takes longer for advertising to kick in because our first instinct on advertising is to cut and paste what we know from existing media to the new media. So if you think about what the new media has to offer, I think the new media has fascinating advantages to offer. What I'm trying to do now is I'm going to try and see if we can predict where this industry is going to go in the next 5 to 8 years and how we can collectively, all of us, build this industry together. I think it's too early in this industry to start figuring out who's going to have what share of which part of the market. This pie is still small. This pie is going to get bigger and bigger because the technology is headed in that direction, users are headed in that direction, and it's not something that one Google or one other company is going to be able to build. It actually requires the advertising industry, the agency businesses, the Googles of the world to kind of work together to go down this technological path and this advertising path. So let's take a look at 4 different ideas that I have about how this thing is going to sort of impact the way advertising happens. So I don't have advertising examples for all of these, so I'm going to try and use examples of technological applications, and if you guys can be a bit creative and think about how each of these translates to advertising, that will help me a lot. So if you take a look at the first example, I think more and more things are getting more localized towards us. And the way to think about it is, I happened to look on the internet the other day for the US Open tennis scores, and I stumbled upon a streaming site of the US Tennis Association where they were streaming the final live. So I ended up sort of destroying the meeting and watching Del Potro beat Roger Federer. But it was being streamed on the internet. And what I thought was fascinating in that is that it had all the television advertising that you could see, and Akamai was involved in streaming, and CBS was there, et cetera. I just sort of set me thinking, just imagine now, because we have gone from what was traditional media or traditional television and gone to what I call bi-directional media, you actually know where I'm watching this from and what time I'm watching it. And it could be live programming, or it could be programming that I watch tomorrow morning. Just having those 2 extra inputs allows me to target the message to the individual a little bit more. And if you take that and start layering more and more information, it allows you to do a lot more targeting than just the broadcast meeting where we're trying to show the same ad to 10 million people. So if we see this trend of video shifting from a broadcast to what eventually becomes, in the ideal world, becomes unicast, then you can add a lot more information, but that requires a whole different world of advertising. Right? The TV ad of today in the web is the 1959 Barbie ad that we saw. The TV ad 50 years later, or the web ad 50 years later on television is going to look very different. It'll look something which I can't even fathom, but even if I could, it'll be something where I watch it, I can pause it, I can go have an engaging experience with that product or that online website. I can come back and watch the rest of my programming, which is just one simple thing that bidirectional programming can allow you to do. So let me show you another application which looks at this notion of localization. There we go. So this is just one clever app designed by somebody that works on Android and iPhones, where it uses the camera on the phone, and you can scan it around you, and it then tries to reference what you're looking at, knowing your location. It can try and reference with its small database of what is around that location, and then tell you what that place is. So all that is done is taken very existing technologies and given you a way more localized experience of where you are. Now just think, if you are an advertising professional trying to create an advertising opportunity in that, your advertising is going to look very different from what you traditionally are able to do today and you think about today. If you take the next idea on what we're likely to see, okay, come on, work with me. There we go. You know, we are going to see a lot more information created by the individual. We already see that. You see that on the Facebooks of the world. You see that on the YouTubes of the world. You see that on the Twitters of the world, right? The question is, how does this information created by users begin to interact with the corpus of information that exists out there in the world? And we were having this debate earlier in the day about, you know, what is the role of experts? What is the role of my friends? What is the role of crowds in this ability for us to understand and prioritize information? So I think what's going to happen is more and more you will see information created by users. And if you think about it, the holy grail of advertising is to make advertising feel like information. And the best example I can think of is if I'm walking through a desert and I'm thirsty and I see this ad for water and this sign just points saying, water here. It doesn't have to have any models. It doesn't have to have anything complicated. It just says water here. I think that's fantastic. That's not advertising. That's information. Now, if I have my water and I walk up and there are 50 other posters around the place saying water here, that becomes advertising, but it's clutter and noise, which I don't want to deal with, and then it's relying on me to pull what I want. So if you think about that, if we can find a way of taking what is information, which is created by users, and find a way of putting in the notion of advertising in that somehow, that is what advertising will look like in 5 to 8 years from now. Okay. The third thing which I think is fascinating is the web allows us to do something totally different. You know? Marketing is the new finance. We have a sample size of all. I used to be, as Randy said earlier, I used to be the chief marketing officer of T-Mobile. And at that point in time, we used to have this research firm come walk in, show us what they asked 500 people or 5,000 people what they thought. On the web, you can actually ask everybody at the same time. You can see who's using a product. You can launch something today and find out what 1 million people thought about it. That's what we do every day. You know, we'll launch tollback experiments at Google and find out what 1 million people thought, which for those of you who are researchers or you think that we need enough data to make this work, you realize that marketing becomes the new finance. You can actually sample your entire customer base. You don't have to worry about what this person thought versus what that person thought. And last but not the least, I think it sort of relates to my first point about personalization. You know, again, this is an ad which I think is sort of one step above the Barbie ad. This is a Sprint ad which they ran on YouTube, which is a masthead, where they asked users to engage and upload videos and sort of build a now clock. They had 120,000 uploads over the course of a weekend and a few million hits within 2 days because they actually turned advertising into engagement. And sort of the broader point is that the internet as a medium, and again, even calling it the internet is a bit hard, and I'll talk about that in a second. The internet as a medium allows us to create this bi-directional media. We've never had bi-directional media before. You know, television was one way, broadcast, print was one way, radio is one way. For the first time, you have bi-directional media. And the moment you create the notion of us being able to pass information back, whether it's information about my preferences, whether it's information about how I engage with your product, you automatically open up a whole new world in any form of advertising that you take. And if you look at the way technology is evolving, and that's why I say it's hard to call it the internet, you know, I've got a dish box in my house which has a broadband cable connection in the back of it. And I'm sure at some point in time, I will be able to have the choice of watching something that is broadcast to me via dish or watching something that comes down the internet. At that point in time, is advertising that comes down the internet online and advertising that comes down the satellite offline? I don't know. So those lines begin to blur. What I do know is the advertising that I get, which comes down the internet, is going to be bidirectional. And what I do know is the one that comes out with technology which uses broadcast is going to be unidirectional. And if that is true, I think we're still at the early parts of this journey towards digital marketing, and we're still sort of in the horseless carriage stage of digital marketing. We are going to start calling it marketing in our careers. I think in the next 5 to 8 years, 30 to 50% of all advertising is going to end up moving towards this medium of what we call bidirectional or or digital marketing. And I'm not here to say this is that traditional media is not going to be relevant, because don't forget, still 70% of it still be happening in traditional media. But television still exists, radio still exists. We're just going to see more growth in this area of digital marketing. And I already see it now as we meet large partners and large advertisers and large agencies. This is not lost on anybody. We're all working towards making this industry happen.